The first case that we have today that we'll actually hear is going to be a density bonus case pursuant to Section 3036080A of the Glendale Municipal Code. When an applicant for density bonus requests incentives or concessions, the Director of Planning shall grant the requested incentives or concessions unless he or she makes written findings based upon substantial evidence of either of the following. The incentive or concession is not required in order to provide for affordable housing costs or to provide affordable rents. The Director of Planning shall consult with the Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing prior to determining whether an incentive or concession is required to provide for affordable housing. The incentive or concession would have a specific adverse impact upon public health and safety or the physical environment or on any real property that is listed in the California Register of Historic Resources and for which there is no feasible method to satisfactorily mitigate or avoid the specific adverse impact without rendering the development unaffordable to low and moderate income households. As used herein, specific adverse impact upon public health or safety means a significant, quantifiable, direct, and unavoidable impact based on conditions as they existed on the date the application was deemed complete. Inconsistency with the zoning ordinance or the land use designation in the general plan shall not constitute a specific adverse impact upon public health or safety. Pursuant to Section 3036.080B of the Glendale Municipal Code, an applicant may request waivers or modification of development standards in addition to incentives or concessions requested. The Director of Planning shall deny the request for waivers or modifications of development standards pursuant to this section unless he or she makes the following written findings. The application of said development standards will have the effect of precluding the construction of housing development at the density and with the incentives or concessions granted pursuant to this chapter. And 2, the requested waivers or modification are necessary to make the housing development economically feasible. Now, those findings that are in the Glendale Municipal Code actually come directly from state law. So that is a state law that Glendale complies with related to density bonus for affordable housing. Other cases on the agenda today include a variance under the provisions of Title 30, Chapter 30.43 of the Glendale Municipal Code. A variance shall be granted if 4 required findings are present. 1, that the strict application of the ordinance would result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship inconsistent with the general purposes and intent of this ordinance. 2, that there are exceptional circumstances or conditions applicable to the property involved or to the intended use or development of the property that do not generally apply to other property in the same zone or neighborhood. 3, that the granting of the variance will not be materially detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the property or improvements in such zone or neighborhood in which the property is located. And 4, that the granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objectives of this ordinance. If the evidence presented in the application and at the hearing meets the criteria just described, then the zoning administrator can either approve or impose conditions for approval on the case in question. If the findings of fact are not evident, then the request will be denied. Notification of this hearing was accomplished by the use of public notices, which were mailed to property owners located within 500 feet of the subject property, physically posted on the site in question, and placed in the local newspaper. Hearings will proceed as follows. I'll read the description of the application request. I'll read the reports received from other city departments and other letters or communications received from interested parties. The case planner will make a brief overview of the case, give analysis, and make a recommendation. The applicant will then be asked to come forward stating both name and address and will be asked to present the case within a 15-minute time limit. Others in support of or in opposition to the application and interested parties will be asked to come forward to speak, again clearly stating both name and address within a 3-minute time limit. Lastly, the applicant will be given the opportunity to make closing comments if desired in response to testimonies given by previous speakers within a 5-minute time limit. The hearing will be closed and the case taken under submission. We do have the option also of making a decision at this meeting. After the hearing, the decision will be prepared in writing and will be in the form of a letter sent to the applicant and to all persons who responded to the public notice, either by speaking at this hearing or by submitting written responses, and also who have provided their name and mailing address. The date of the decision will be the date appearing on the letter. Under the appeals provision of Title 30, Chapter 30.62 of the Glendale Municipal Code, the decision may be appealed to the Planning Commission within 15 days of the date of decision. That wouldn't be the date of the hearing, but the date of the letter, the date of the decision letter. Anyone wishing to appeal may obtain forms and brochures on the procedures from the Building and Safety Section Permit Services Center located on the same floor of this building. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on one of the speaker's forms, one of these green forms, and please submit those to our planning assistant. I would also like to inform everyone that the official proceedings of the zoning administrator's hearing are tape recorded on tape as part of the public record. So with that, I'll start with our first case. Our first case is located at 1244 Berkeley Drive, case number PVAR 2009-041. The applicant is V. Barbieri. The owner is J. Barbieri. Case planner is Dennis Joe. This is an application for a standards variance to construct a two-story, 953-square-foot addition to an existing 1,170 square foot single-family residence with a legally non-conforming 4-foot 0-inch interior setback located at 1244 Berkeley Drive within the R1R Restricted Residential Zone, Floor Area District 3, described as Lot A, Parcel Map 1477. Now, I have no cards for any speakers for that item. Are there any speakers for that item here today? Okay, seeing none. We did receive a request from the applicant that has asked that this project be taken off calendar for a minimum of 60 days. There is a request to submit additional information on that item. So therefore, I will honor that request and I will take this item off calendar. And when it will be rescheduled, it'll be rescheduled subject to new public notice. So for the second item, I have 327 and 331 Salem Street and City Parking Lot number 12. This is case number PDB 2009-001. The applicant is Rodney Kahn of Kahn Consulting. Owners are Glendale Salem 1 LLC and the City of Glendale. Case planner is Eric Krause. This is an application for a density bonus housing plan to construct a new 4-story, 36-unit affordable rental housing project with concessions to allow additional height, floor area ratio, 1 additional story, and waivers from street front setback and parking located at 327 and 331 Salem Street and City Parking Lot number 12 and the R1250 high-density residential and R1250 PS high-density residential parking structure overlay zones, described as lots 35, 36, 37, and 38. Block 2, Moore's re-subdivision of a portion of Block 9, Glendale Boulevard tract. And see what we have for comments from other departments. Oh, and I'd also like to note for this item, there is a final mitigated negative declaration that has been prepared. The public comment period did close on February 1st, and or February 2nd, rather. There was a production of a final mitigated negative declaration, and that is available for public review. So for comments from other division, I do have letters or comments from the water department. It's just noting that individual water meters are required, backflow prevention devices would be required, and any water service or fire line connection must be permanently abandoned when no longer needed by the customer. The applicant must check with the fire department to determine if existing flow is adequate. And the developer shall install recycled water facilities for irrigation, initially connected to the potable system until recycled water service can be extended. And so these are standard conditions. We also have comments from GWP Electrical Engineering. They've noted that the existing street lighting is to remain in place and improvement required. A relocation of existing facilities will be at the owner or developer's expense. We have comments that the project must provide a minimum 5-foot clearance area from the face of GWP power poles and is responsible to show clearance on area plans. The existing overhead electrical line clearance at the conflict at the rear property line needs to be resolved, and that would be resolved at the project expense. The project is responsible to maintain a minimum 10-foot radial clearance from GWP overhead lines with all their construction equipment. If the project needs GWP assistance, the project would be responsible for paying for that assistance. The project would also be required to have an on-site electrical vault for new electrical service. GWP will start the new vault design after the project has provided the following items, and there's a list of items they need to provide, and it's also noted that a building permit would need to be required for that. So any new electrical feed shall be underground from Salem. Those are the comments from GWP. Again, those are pretty standard. We do have a comment from the Community Redevelopment and Housing Division that says they do support this application for approval of the use variance to allow live-work units in the R250 zone, as well as support for the concessions and waivers pursuant to the density bonus initiatives, because the developer advanced development and investment will be working in partnership with the City of Glendale Housing Authority to construct 36 affordable units. We have a note also from Neighborhood Services. They just note that they have no open code enforcement cases on the subject property. There's just made a note about the parking in the neighborhood. And they have they just said they recommend that the neighborhood the neighborhood have a chance to comment for potential impacts to operations if parking lot 12 were to be eliminated. So. And we just note from fire department, adequate separation of required exits would be required, and there's also required clearance along exit paths. There'll be code requirements for fire sprinklers and ladder access to rescue windows. We have comments from, I believe, libraries. Applicant must comply with park and library impact fee payment. Sorry, that was from the Parks Department. We also have a comment from the police department. They have no major concerns. And they said parking is always a question to be answered by traffic and transportation engineering. They recommend that traffic and transportation engineering review the project, which they have in the environmental document. And the police department is satisfied that they have no major concerns with this development. We've also received comments from Public Works regarding the City of Glendale sewer capacity increased fee. So this applicant notes that the sewer capacity increased fee must be paid to the engineering division prior to issuance of a grading permit or building permit. And then we've also received comments. We have a comment. It's an email comment from es2150@aol.com, and that's just as we own the building and parking lot adjacent to City 12. We just received notice of the hearing last week and planned on being at the hearing to voice our opposition to the project. This is then, to my surprise, I see that an EIR was running and we were never notified of the EIR. At first glance, I thought that this project was planned on the now vacant land, but they were surprised to find that it also includes the public parking lot 12. So that was a comment we received in opposition. We have a letter from Seda Agahanian, and she's writing as a concerned real estate investor in the city of Glendale. The trust is owned an apartment building at 338 West Salem Street. It's a multifamily with 16 apartments. They noted that there's a street parking and congestion in the area, and they're concerned with a reduction to 58 parking spaces. And they say they disagree with the arguments that have been set forth by the applicant. They disagree that reducing the number of parking spaces will not impose a hardship on the community. They say taking away parking lot 12 will be a problem. So note that objection. We also have, I believe this is the same letter. We have a letter from D. Bruce Prout from Sierra Madre. He's writing in opposition to density bonus case PDB 2009-001. He is opposed to the waiver. He is noting that the existing two-story apartment at 347 West Salem Street is owned by the trust in which he is a trustee, and he's raising concerns with the waiver. He says that there's a lot of lower height residents in the area, 1 story and mixed 2 and 3 stories. So he's in opposition to the height of the building. He's also raising concerns with the off-site vehicular parking and with the loss of the public lot. And he's noting that he's in opposition of the concessions and waivers. We also have a letter, a note in, somebody returned the public notice with comments on it. It's from Ruth Anderson, and so she's against overbuilding and variances and says no to all new development in the area. We received an email from Nikki Friedman, and she said she would like to go on record as saying she has no objection whatsoever to affordable housing. However, I'm very concerned about the waiver to allow fewer parking spaces. Says they have a difficult time finding parking on the street, and they're concerned with the additional cars and loss of the public lot. And she's not in favor of the parking waiver. We also have an email from Elizabeth Elegian, and it says, our condominium is south of the proposed building. We have a nice view of the mountains north of Glendale. By having the proposed development higher than 3 floors, it may cause obstructions to our view of the mountains and compromise the value of our condominium. So they would appreciate the department would make necessary a study to make sure that their view would not be affected by this new development. And then I also have comments from Public Works. And we have comments from the Engineering Division. These look like standard comments related to the roadway, that they need to have a grading permit. They have to perform street improvements along the entire frontage of the property on Salem Avenue in accordance with Public Works construction standards to the satisfaction of the city engineer. Includes a widened portion of the roadway. They have to have a sewer capacity increase, and they need to pay that fee to the city's engineering division. That was noted before. All relocation would have to be paid for by the applicant. Drainage would have to be properly provided for. A dual sump pump design wouldn't be required. and they have to comply with NPDES requirements. So those are pretty standard conditions. Again, sewer capacity studies needed. They'll need to have a construction and demolition waste reduction and recycling plans submitted. And they have to have a plan for recycling. We also have standard comments from our maintenance services regarding street trees. And we have comments from the traffic and transportation system. And as part of that note, it says, in staff's opinion, the parking demand analysis has been prepared in a professional manner utilizing commonly accepted study methodologies and parameters. As a result, staff is accepting the conclusions and recommendations contained in the parking demand analysis. And then there's a synopsis of the parking demand analysis methodology and the potential for project-generated traffic impacts. And those have been addressed in the city's environmental document. I don't see any other comments in the file. Have we received any other comments this morning that you're aware of?
None that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, I'd like to ask staff to present a staff report.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Stotler. As you indicated, the project is requesting approval of a density bonus housing plan. It's case number PDB 2009-001. The project's located at 327 and 331 Salem Street and city parking lot number 12, and this totals 4 lots of approximately 27,910 square feet. The applicant is Con Consulting, representing Advanced Development and Investment. The general plan designation is high-density residential, and the zoning is R1250, and there is a parking structure overlay zone on the 2 lots where Lot 12 is currently located. The applicant is seeking assistance from the Glendale Housing Authority to construct a project. Proposed affordable housing project includes a 4-story, 36-unit project that would include 4 artist lofts that each contain 1 bedroom, 14 2-bedroom units, 9 3-bedroom units, and 9 4-bedroom units. A total of 58 parking spaces is proposed and 2 levels of subterranean parking, and that includes 4 handicap spaces as well. Excuse me. The applicant is seeking approval of concessions and waivers under the density bonus housing code, which is Glendale Municipal Code Section 3036, and also under Government Section Code 65915, which is the state density bonus housing law. For concessions, under the ordinance, they're allowed up to 3 concessions based on the amount of affordability they're providing. They're providing 100% affordable units, which allows them a 35% maximum density bonus, as well as 3 concessions. The concessions are requesting under Section 336070A is to construct a 4-story building when only 3 stories is permitted under the code. And under that, as part of that, the height of the building is total height would be 41 feet. And under the code, they're allowed a maximum of 36 feet with no pitch on the roof. But if they were to provide a 3-foot and 12-foot pitch, they would be allowed to go to 41 feet. So because they're doing a flat roof, they're requesting a concession for the height. They're also requesting, as I mentioned, the story requirement. There was 3 stories allowed in the zone. They're requesting 4. And a floor area ratio from 1.2 units allowed by code, or 1.2 allowed by code to 1.8. And which is consistent with actually a 33% increase in density is what they're requesting. So they're asking for 9 units above what will be allowed by code. The waivers they're asking for are to not provide the setbacks in the street front. So they want to provide basically a setback of 20 feet, so they're not going to be meeting the averaging setback, minimum setback averaging. And they're also requesting a waiver to further reduced parking allowed under the SB 1818 or the Glendale Municipal Code 3036, which under the ratios provided in the code, they're allowed they have to provide one parking space for one-bedroom units, two for two-bedroom and three-bedroom units, and then 2.5 for four-bedroom units. Excuse me. So under the code, and then they would be required to provide 81 parking spaces under the density bonus ordinance. Or under a regular code, it would be 99 spaces. So they're proposing to do 58 spaces, so they're asking for a waiver from the 81 required under the density bonus ordinance. Let's see here. On parking lot 12 would be removed as part of the project as well. And there's 2 oak trees located on the most westerly lot, which is 327 Salem, I believe. Those would be removed as part of the project as well. We prepared a mitigated negative declaration for the project, which addressed impacts from the project and determined that there was potential for 2 impacts which could be mitigated. That was impacts on oak trees, which are protected under the city ordinance, and as well as a park impact fees, which the mitigation would require them to pay full share of the park impact fees, which is like $14,251 per unit, and to replace oak trees as well as pay an assessed value of the oak trees to be removed. So with those 2 mitigation measures, the project could be fully mitigated. The noticing period for that ran for 30 days, began on January 2nd, 2010, and ended on February 1st, 2010. We received one comment that specifically addressed the environmental assessment, and that dealt with the loss of the parking lot and the amount of parking spaces that were being provided. We prepared a response to that as part of the final mitigated negative declaration. And essentially the parking study that was submitted with the application did actual parking counts at existing affordable housing projects within the city, and then came up with different ratios in terms of what would be required for an affordable project. So what the study indicated was that for the live-work units, it would require 1 on-site parking space plus 1 guest space. The 2-bedroom units would require 1.2 spaces plus 0.17 guests. 3 bedrooms, 1.4 spaces and 0.17 guests. And for the 4 bedrooms, 1.6 spaces plus 0.7 guests. So that came out to a total of 57 spaces required per these ratios provided in the parking study. The parking study was evaluated by staff as well as the Traffic and Transportation Department, and who agreed with the findings in the report. The other issue that was raised in the comment was the loss of Lot 12. In terms of right now the Lot 12 is metered. It has going to be 9-hour limit, I believe. It's from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. is when it's metered. And based on some of the data that we had from revenues from the meters, it's about 16% utilized during those times. And it's actually, the number was based on the older meter ratings, which I'm going to ask Tom to clarify, Tom Mitchell from Traffic Transportation, but I believe they went from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so based on those timings, there was a 16% occupancy rate for those meters, and they've been recently changed, so there's no data in terms of how often they're used, but based on some site visits that were conducted by staff, we went out to take a look at, after the meters are no longer in operation, how many people were actually using the lot. So we went on 3 separate times, 10 p.m., and then following that is 2:25 a.m. and then 5:30 a.m., and found that there's no more than 2 cars parked at any one of those times when the parking lot's not metered. Excuse me. In terms of the findings, under the density bonus ordinance, in terms of the conditions, as Ms. Stotler indicated, there's 2 findings required to actually, the zoning hearing officer would have to make those findings to actually deny the request. So those would be, I don't know if do you need me to reread the findings?
No, that's okay. I have them here.
So in terms of the discussion of the findings that were included in the staff report, staff believes that there's no findings that can be made under the 2 findings for the concessions that would allow the zoning hearing officer to deny the project. Those findings couldn't be made. And as well as the findings for the additional waivers, that those findings could be made. And that's basically the way the code reads. It's usually up to the applicant to provide information and everything to justify that. And as part of that, they work with our housing department to determine the cost and feasibility of cost in not providing certain, like if they weren't able to get the waivers, then what would that do in terms of the cost of the project? Would it no longer make it feasible in terms of cost, whether or not they could actually build the affordable units? And so those findings staff felt could be made. Trying to think if I was trying to add a little more. Well, at this point, I'm just going to conclude my staff report. So basically, staff is recommending that the zoning hearing officer approve the proposed density bonus housing plan, case number 2009-001, and that would be subject to the draft conditions that were included in the staff report, as well as adding an additional condition that the applicant comply with the Public Works Engineering section comments, which weren't received prior to the staff report. Thank you.
Thanks. The next, I'd like to call the project applicant, Rodney Kahn.
Good morning, Ms. Stotler and city staff and those attending the hearing this morning. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located at 1111 North Brand Boulevard, Suite 403, here in the city of Glendale. As Mr. Kraus stated in his staff report, this is a new affordable family housing project, and we're calling it Central City Lights. Our project is a 36-unit project. It has 4 artist lofts, which the code classifies as live-work units. We have 14 two-bedrooms, 9 three-bedrooms, and 9 four-bedrooms. So quite a range of different housing types within this project. The project, we'll talk about the parking as we go through the concessions and the waivers. In terms of the amenities for the project, we have really 3 or 4 that I'd like to highlight. One is that we are looking at a large outdoor plaza, both a passive plaza, if you look at the interior courtyard, and also an active plaza, as you look at the exterior. We have a children's play area and tot lot, and something a little bit different for our project we have, which is a rooftop herb garden. Those are types of things that we're looking at in terms of amenities for our project. Also, 1,100 square foot community room to be used by the residents and their guests. The current use of the site, as is called out, is a public parking lot. It's a very underutilized public parking lot, and it is 2 lots that currently sit vacant. I see in the photograph or in the image that's presented, it shows as if there's structures on the site. There actually is not. Those structures have been removed a little while ago. In fact, has a chain link fence around it, and unfortunately people have been using it for dumping stuff on the site. So aesthetically, this new project will enhance that area substantially as it relates to what currently exists and what is being proposed. A little bit about the context of the neighborhood and why this is just an excellent location for this type of project. To the north of us, we have a commercial parking lot, and we have multifamily residential. To the south is the same. Commercial parking lot, multifamily residential. To the west, we have a 2-story residential building. To the east, we have a commercial parking lot and then a 6-story office building. And the reason that I say that this is such a nice location is its proximity of the site to the downtown, to the central business district, and to the many opportunities that exist in that area. For our site is within walking distance to restaurants, to retail shops, to recreational amenities. Also along Central Avenue, which is very beneficial, is we have public transportation, which is just a couple hundred feet away. Both the MTA and the Glendale B line run up and down Central Avenue, and just south of us on Broadway, about a block and a half away, is kind of a main hub for public transportation. CEQA analysis, and Mr. Kraus talked about the environmental document and what's been performed. We did submit an initial study. We had 2 separate studies that we also performed. One was for noise, and the conclusion was that there was not going to be a noise impact because we were concerned about decibel levels and proximity to Central Avenue. And then the second is a parking study, and that's something I'll elaborate on a little bit further in my presentation. As was suggested, a mitigated negative declaration was recommended. We've reviewed those mitigation measures, and we agree to comply with them. Something exciting for us to do on this project, which once again we have not done on other projects. This will be the first affordable housing project in the city of Glendale that is LEED certified. And LEED, as you know, is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. In fact, it will be a silver LEED certified building. So we've incorporated a number of green building standards, sustainable techniques, use of recycled carpets, drought-tolerant landscaping, high-efficiency toilets, things like that, just to name a few. And that's very different and very unique for us that we're excited about. What I'd like to do is talk briefly about the housing element, and then I'll talk about the density bonus ordinance, concessions, and waivers. As you know, you may have worked on it actually, the housing element of the general plan was updated, I think it was January of 2009. And the housing element consists of a number of goals and policies. Goal number 1 is to create a city with a wide range of housing types to meet the needs of current and future residents. And within those goals, there's policies to try to implement those goals. And I'll just highlight 3 of them that I think are applicable to this project. The first is Policy 1.3, to provide higher density residential development in close proximity to public transportation, services, and recreation. The second 1.4 policy continued to promote residential mixed-use development, including live-work units in appropriate locations. And it's interesting, doing research for the live-work units, currently there are no live-work units in the downtown area or adjacent to the downtown area. So this would be a nice component to have for this project. And then the last policy that I'll cite as it relates to this is 1.9, which specifically states to encourage flexibility in the zoning ordinance to promote a wide range of housing types. Mr. Kraus talked about the density bonus ordinance that the city of Glendale has. Obviously, it's to encourage the construction of as much affordable housing as we can get, because we are in dire need of this city to have affordable housing for our residents and future residents. The amount of density bonus was already talked about, but I'll briefly touch on it. We currently have, as part of our project, there are certain criteria. And the criteria says you can go up to a 35% if you have, for instance, 10% low-income households or 5% very low-income households. Our project has 30% low-income households, 60% very low-income households, and 10% extremely low-income households. So this project is fulfilling many, many needs as it relates to that. Mr. Kraus talked about our lot size. It's about 27,900 square feet. Because of the consolidations of the lots, we're able to do 1 unit per 1,000 square feet. That's where you come up with 27 units by right. You apply the density bonus formula of 35%. That's where we get to the 36. As it relates to the concessions, and then I'll do the waivers. The concessions themselves we talked about, Mr. Kraus spoke about. One is for height, one is for number of stories, and one is for floor area ratio. And I'll do them backwards. The floor area ratio relates specifically to the density. We are increasing the density according to the density bonus ordinance, thus the floor area ratio is also going to increase. Our unit sizes are very, very modest. We do not have large unit sizes. We do meet the code. For instance, a 2-bedroom unit is 800 square feet. That's the code minimum. A 3-bedroom unit is 1,000 square feet. That's the code minimum. So we are not trying to enhance or increase the square footage, but simply to be able to match the density with the floor area. The second item, as it relates to stories and height basically go together. But one of the things I'd like to point out is if you look at the site plan, and I mentioned as part of my comments about the open space outdoor plaza, I mentioned about the separation and what type of amenities we're providing for the project. The reason that we're doing this is, one, is because it makes for a better design and a more livable project. But also what we're doing, and this relates to the height and number of stories, is instead of designing a box that just had all of the units in a square box and had real no aesthetic pleasing value or livability to it, we decided to take units that would have been on the first floor, units that would have been on the second floor, and units that would have been on the third floor, and put them on the fourth floor. And that creates both an aesthetic appearance and also, as I said, a more open, more desirable project in our opinion. So that relates to the stories. The height itself, as Mr. Krause pointed out, by right or by code, we are allowed to do 36 feet. If we were to have a 3 and 12 pitched roof, we can go up to 41 feet. We are at 41 feet. The reason that we chose not to do a 3 and 12 pitch roof is because it doesn't go with the architectural style of the building that we're proposing. Also, as it relates to height, our ceiling, our floor-to-floor ceiling heights are very, very modest. The interior clearance ceiling height is 8 feet 1 inches for the residential units. So we're not having tall ceilings. We're just trying to create a livable project and trying to create as many affordable housing units as we can that is desirable for our city. In terms of the findings themselves, I think Eric already touched on. I'll be very brief on this. About the incentive or concession is not required in order to provide the affordable housing costs. It is absolutely required. If we do not get these concessions, if we do not get these waivers, this project will not be built. It's plain and simple as that. There's really a few reasons. One is the economics that are involved, the city participation, and how much funding sources you guys have. Plus, we go out. This is a $15 million project. $6 to $7 million of that is through tax credits. In order to get state tax credits, we compete against other projects throughout the state. If we cannot compete, and the competition is based on a variety of factors, but I'll just touch on a few items. One is the number of units in a project, this amount of subsidy that's being involved from the city, the location and proximity to other uses that are in the area for the affordable family residents. If we can't compete with these things, we won't have to worry about the project because it won't be built. We simply need funding sources from many different forms of government in order to make this happen. The savings for this project will be used for other projects in the city that otherwise also would not be built. Secondly, the incentive or concession would have a specific adverse impact upon public health and safety, physical environment, real property that's listed, and it also talks about historical resources. As it relates to this second finding, obviously there's been CEQA analysis that's been done. CEQA analysis includes, as you know, quite a variety of items, everything from biological resources, aesthetics, public services, utilities, noise, land use, population, transportation, traffic, recreation, et cetera, and the list goes on. Obviously, any real or perceived impacts we are able to mitigate. The second thing, as it relates to historic resources, as I mentioned before, there are no structures on the site. It's the parking lot and a vacant 2 lots. So that component really doesn't apply at this time. That's the concessions. And what I'd like to do is go into the waivers if I can.
Okay.
The last item that we're talking about, one has to do with setbacks and one has to do with parking. We actually have a board that we've created as it relates to the setbacks, because I want to be very clear. And what I could do also is if it's easier for the camera for me to come up to the board, you tell me what the easiest way is.
Why don't you come up and we'll get an easel for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And then actually, while you come up, one of the comments that we received was from Water and Power, concerned with the clearance for the existing power lines. So if you could show me how you're going to address that too.
Sure.
I'll have it right in front of the screen.
No, I think that'll be okay.
You want to move it somewhere else?
I just want to make sure everybody can see what I'm doing. As it relates to the setback, I'll do the setback issue, and then I'll answer the question as it relates to public service electric. In terms of the project itself, this is first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. All floors have the average setback. In fact, we have some lines here. This red line shows what the average setback is, which we are significantly further back from for us. This shows what the code requirement would be. We have on the second, the third, and the fourth floors, if you notice, there are small projections. There's a projection here for 3 feet, a projection here for 3 feet, and a projection here for 3 feet. Those are the setback projections that we're talking about. That is the only area on the entire project, both for average and for minimum, that do not meet code. The reason that we just don't simply push back those 3 feet areas on the second and the third and the fourth floors is because we're trying to keep an interior court of a minimum of 20 feet. Because when you push it too close together, it gets to be like a tunnel effect. You eliminate air, you eliminate light, ventilation, and everything else. So once again, this waiver is for these 3-foot projections on the 3 floors, and that's it. The second thing, as it relates to what you had mentioned we have utility poles on the north side of the property, which is our rear.
Right.
This is our rear setback. We have an average, and if you look at it, it's actually for the arms. And the arms are going to be higher up, obviously, on the second or the third and fourth floors, not necessarily on the first and second. So if I go to the third floor and I look at what our setbacks are, we have a minimum of about a 14-foot setback, and then we have an average of about 19-foot setback. So we will have the flexibility to be away, and I think the code said a minimum of 10 feet.
Correct.
From where that extension of that arm is.
Okay, so you're actually providing more clearance than the existing house. There's a building off California right now that's actually under the arms. So I just want to make sure you're actually providing much more clearance than that
we would
existing
have
structure.
We would have the clearance once again at that existing structure. That's a good point. However, it's a lower structure.
Yeah,
Ours is
exactly.
a taller structure.
Okay.
So we would be outside of the length of the.
Okay.
I'll give that back to you. Finally, the last concession as it relates to parking, and that's something that I listened to the comments that were stated specifically from folks that have been writing in, and feel that we need to kind of talk about this a little bit. This is our 5th project with ADI, our 5th affordable housing project here in the city of Glendale, and they're all affordable family projects. This is an affordable family project. We learned as we progress through the construction and through the evolution of these projects. Our first project, which was Metropolitan City Lights on Gardena, across from the Glendale Transit Center. We built that project, and we built it according to the parking that's being recommended originally by the code. When that project was constructed, and we had our grand opening, and we had walking through it, we were looking at it and we were saying, wow, this is a tremendous amount of parking. But let's not focus on that. Let's jump forward to where we're at in terms of it being 100% occupied, to being able to analyze and determine what are the needs of the residents, what are the type of studies that can be conducted, and how much open parking do we have, or do we even need more parking than what we've provided. We did these studies and analyses a few years ago because the projects were up and they were operational. And the conclusion was that we had significantly overparked it to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to the detriment. The problem would be is that money we could actually use, the city could use, to build more affordable housing. So if we don't need the parking, then let's not build it. That was the original idea was, let's go back and look at our projects, the way they function, the way they operate, and let's see what works. As was mentioned by staff, we hired a traffic engineering firm. I probably have about 5 more minutes tops. I'll try to.
That's fine.
We hired a traffic engineering firm, Applied Planning, and this was a few years ago. They went back and they studied our projects. And what they did was they did parking occupancy surveys at 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And they looked at it and they said, during the most peak time for residential is in the evening, when people are back home from work, both for the visitors and for the people that occupy the residence. The the peak demands for both of these items, and there was a complete analysis and study done. I don't have the time, but it's certainly available, and like you said, it's addressed in the environmental document. It showed what type of parking would be required, and that was for a project that was outside of the downtown area. This was projects along the San Fernando Road corridor. So as you get closer to the downtown area, there's also a formula that you can use that shows how many parking spaces or how much parking is required the closer you are to services. And it's a very logical, it's by the traffic engineering, it's by a whole variety of different uses. So not only is it just a book, it is an actual physical study that we've done on our existing projects. That is how we came up with the number of parking spaces. It was not just something that we decided this is what we're going to provide. It was through study and analysis, and it's through professional engineering companies. We work closely with traffic and transportation. Obviously, I'd defer to them to any of the comments they'd like to add. But it was very clear as to what we wanted to do. We want to have sufficient parking for our residents as well. The last item, and I'll leave you on this note, as it relates to parking in the area, there is a number of older multifamily projects that do not have sufficient parking because the codes were very different then than they are now. This site, as it currently exists, and I'll just look at the public parking lot, right now on the street, and we'll look at the street parking because that's usually the most impacted. The street parking in front of this site, it's 100 feet in width. It's 2 lots, 50 feet by 50 feet. Right now it has a driveway in and has a driveway out. All of the curbing in front of it is red curbed, meaning no one can park on it. So as a result of the project, that red curbing will be removed. One of those driveways will be removed, and we'll pick up about 80 feet of frontage that will now be able to have 3 or 4 cars parked on the street. So as it relates to the street parking, it's actually being improved. Anyway, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you for listening to me. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I do have one question.
Sure.
I'm concerned, I realize that your plans aren't fully drawn. This is just still a concept. But how are you going to relate to the properties, the single-family homes that are on Salem adjacent to your lot? So how is the podium going to relate to that? How is the height going to work?
Ms. Stadler, a few things. First of all, as you know, this is one piece of the puzzle of our entitlements. So
Okay.
we've been working closely with both Stephanie Wright, your urban designer, along with many of your other staff people. What we have done is the west side of the property is the side you're talking about.
Right, adjacent to the single-family.
Adjacent to the 2-story single-family house to our west.
And a portion of the north.
And a portion of the
right.
north. That is correct. And if you look at the north, I think we've addressed as it relates to the setbacks.
Yeah, you
we have
gotta stay away.
increased
That's-
setbacks, and there will be landscaping. As it relates to the west, though, if you notice on, and I'm looking for elevation drawing, we've actually dropped the building height and removed units from the west side to bring the scale of the building down. So if you look at the exterior elevation, on the elevations, I don't want to walk up there, but yeah, to your left, yeah, to your left. So you'll see.
This
You'll
is
see.
the one they'll be seeing, but this is...
Correct. To the left side, I meant left of what you were pointing at. Yeah, so you'll see the building mass and scale being dropped down adjacent to the west side. And that was to acknowledge and to address the fact that we are adjacent to a 2-story building, and so we're stepping our building in that area.
And it'll be fully sub in that your parking would be
That's
fully
correct.
sub in that location?
That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. Because I know we've had that concern on other projects. I just want to make sure that it's being addressed from day one in this
Right.
one.
The other thing I'd like to add, if I may point out, in our subterranean parking garage, which you see the 2 levels on the left side of the board, our subterranean parking garage does not go up to the property line. And the reason that that's important is we can plant mature and large trees that go directly into the soil and not are just on a podium or surface.
Okay. All right.
Thank
I
you very
don't
much.
have any more questions.
Thanks.
Thanks. Next, I'd like to call up Tom Mitchell, with a traffic engineer, just to get some clarification on the traffic study. I know we've heard from the applicant, but I'd like to make sure that you also agree with the methodology that was used in the environmental report.
Good morning. My name is Tom Mitchell, Assistant Traffic and Transportation Administrator. I'll be happy to comment a little bit on what Mr. Kraus said as what Mr. Kahn said. Our department reviewed two specific aspects initially, and we gave information on a third. The two that we looked at specifically, one is we worked with the traffic engineering consultant that Mr. Kahn mentioned, applied planning for the conduct of the demand study, the parking demand study, for how many parking spaces does this project require. And as been stated, 81 parking spaces are required by code, and they're proposing 58. The parking study that was conducted was done, as Mr. Kahn had mentioned. It relied very heavily on data that had been collected a couple years ago at Metropolitan City Lights. The current proposed project is very similar, with the exception it also has 1-bedroom and 4-bedroom apartments, whereas Metropolitan City Lights was 2- and 3-bedroom. But based upon that information, together with updates, windshield surveys of Metropolitan City Lights to see that their parking occupancy patterns had not changed, and they had not, we were comfortable that the data that had been collected almost 2 years ago was still applicable. That information then was used to project what would be required for this project. Again, it wasn't totally an apples and apples in the sense that there were some 1- and 4-bedroom units involved. The 1-bedrooms were live-work units or artist lofts, which were pulled out and dealt with separately. But it was necessary then to figure out what is going to be the required ratios for these different apartment uses. A key component was, again, as has been mentioned, Metropolitan City Lights. It's about 1.5 miles south of the downtown. It's clearly not affected by the CBD or the DSP area. So some reduction in the ratios at Metropolitan City Lights were made to take into account what is going to be the impact on parking requirements in the downtown. That impact is a reduction is appropriate. If they provided more parking, fine. If they were providing 81 parking spaces or more, that would be fine. But in our view, it's more spaces that are necessary. Our department doesn't care if they save money and it gets shifted somewhere else or not. We just looked at it from the standpoint of how many spaces would be realistic for this project. And again, it took into account the downtown location. We used information published by the Urban Land Institute and Institute of Transportation Engineers that say, what's the difference if you're in a suburban area or if you're in an area that's heavily served by transit or one that's in the downtown by both? Has been mentioned, this is right on the immediate periphery of the downtown. So conservative factors were applied to come up with the ratios that Mr. Kraus had mentioned. So in going through that analysis, we were comfortable that the methodology was appropriate and that the findings were those that we could support. So our feeling is, and I can talk about Lot 12 in a minute, is that a project of this size, of its location, if it has the 57 parking spaces, I don't remember the breakdown, but 8 or 9 of which were for guests and the balance were for residents, that it would satisfy the demand, again, based on largely the Metropolitan City Lights survey. Lot 12, Eric was close up until it's been metered for a long time. There are 34 parking spaces on the site. 33 are metered. One is a handicap stall. It today does have a 9-hour parking limit on it. Our meters are 40 cents an hour. They're in effect from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Up until late 2008, it was a shorter time frame. It was 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. City Council approved throughout the downtown at that time an expansion of those hours, and the meters are in effect. We don't have parking occupancy surveys that go back every hour for the last 10 years that we could make plots of things. What I can say is that of the 10 lots that are metered in the downtown area, this particular lot and lot number 11, the reason numbers are higher is we eliminated a few lots when the Americana was built, but we didn't renumber them. Lot 11, which is down by the Armory on the south side of Colorado, between that lot and this lot 12 are the most underperforming lots that the city provides, that where the metered parking is in effect. And by that is the revenue generation is the lowest in this lot and lot 11 in the city by far. The one for this lot, as Eric mentioned, in 2007, 2008, it was a 16% occupancy. Now, you got to remember what exactly that means. It just means that the revenue that was generated, the money that was pulled out of the meters compared to what the potential was for that year, was a 16% factor. But what it does, it gives a good indication, assuming that people do, in fact, feed the meters when they're there reasonably well, is it's underutilized. The average in the downtown areas, including these two underperforming, is over 55%. As a point of perspective, Lot 6 behind Porto's is 90%. So depending where you're going, driving at which lots, you know which lots you can find places to park. This lot is situated, it's kind of off the beaten path. A lot of people don't even know that it's there. If you're going somewhere in that area, most places do have their own off-street parking, whether it's Clancy's or Sears, some of the strip development along the site. And the windshield surveys that we've done over time, that in the past, as well as a result of this project, are borne out by what Eric said earlier. Police have looked at it. In fact, this last Monday night and Tuesday morning, Monday night at 10 o'clock p.m., I looked at the lot, and there were 2 cars parked in there at 10 o'clock. At 2 in the morning, the police drove by, and there were 2 cars in there, and I went by there at 5:30 on Tuesday morning, and there was 1 car in there. I presume those cars that late at night are probably for the residents. I think that resident parking, all-night parking, probably was more utilized there when the hours were from 9 to 6. With the city's expansion from 6 until 10, that may discourage some people from parking there because they don't want to pay those 40 cents the last hours of the day, or they don't want to get up real early and move their car or feed the meter in the morning. That I don't know. But just from these surveys, it doesn't look like it's used that much. Now, I'm sure there are examples. This Sunday, if somebody's hosting a Super Bowl party, maybe that lot will be full. I can't say one way or the other. But generally speaking, as I say, that lot doesn't get a lot of usage. Probably its greatest usage is maybe in the dinner hour, a little after that, at Clancy's, when people who don't want to use, even though it's free, the valet parking at Clancy's, for whatever reason, they'll just park then in our lot. Some feed the meter, some probably don't. But I think that's probably when it's maximum usage. When I've looked at it other times and come and watch people crossing, you can tell sometimes they're carrying the doggy bag and they're going over and getting into that. But I have not seen, there are probably residents here today that may very well say, you know, I park there all the time, and I'll take their word for it. But they're definitely in the minority. So I think that the closure of Lot 12, whether it had anything to do with this particular project or not, certainly would warrant study. But I would say that, again, our opinion based on the information that we have would suggest that really there'd be a very nominal impact by its closure. At first blush, the elimination of 34 parking spaces would raise an eyebrow, but when you consider how those spaces are used, we don't think the impact is going to be that significant.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
And next, I'd like to call at Mike Fortney. I have questions about the affordability. I just want to, we've heard your presentations. I just want to know if you reviewed the affordable housing plan submitted by the applicant, and in your opinion, are these waivers necessary and concessions necessary in order to make the project affordable and to make the city competitive in the tax, I guess it's tax credit, I guess, I don't know if it's an application or a grant or.
That's right.
Okay, allocation could. Okay.
Yeah. I'm happy to answer that. My name is Mike Fortney. I'm the housing project manager, and I have reviewed those. And I can say that Mr. Khan, I think in his presentation, gave a pretty good idea of the economics of this project. I don't think the specific dollar amount yet of the public subsidy request of the city of Glendale is public yet, but I can tell you it's above $5 million. Also, to make the project work, it is going to need $5 million or more from the state through the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee. So that's true. And the reason being is it's an affordable housing project. It will be restricted to very low and low income qualifying families for a period of no less than 55 years.
Okay.
So to answer the question shortly, yes, I do agree with that.
They do, okay. And then, just as far as housing need, how great is the housing need for housing for low income for families, especially, like, assuming it's a large family with 4 bedrooms?
Yeah, the need, the demand for affordable housing in the city is tremendous. We have, this will be the 5th project with this developer. I think that's already been stated once. One of the buildings is still in construction, but the other 3, as well as a couple of other projects that we've got, the projects range from 44 units to as many as 72 units, and we will get generally no less than 4,000, upwards of 6,000 applications for each of those projects. So I think that alone kind of tells
So there's a great demand in Glendale.
Absolutely.
Now, would these be Glendale residents that would have priority for these units?
Yeah, more often than not. And if you look at the projects that we have, most of them are filled by current City of Glendale residents.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the next speaker, Carlos Ovalle. Sorry.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Ovalle, and I'm the architect for the project. I just wanted to introduce myself and make myself available to questions from yourself and staff and the public. My name and telephone number are obviously on the projects. But I wanted to mention just a little bit about parking, since it seems to be a big issue. I've been doing affordable housing throughout most of my career, and I've been working for past 27 years. And my clients have included for-profit and nonprofit housing developers. There was a study published in 2004 by the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, and a very interesting project that has a lot of references from California and throughout the nation for many of these projects, and it basically destroys the myth that a reduction in parking has a detrimental effect on the neighborhoods, because this happens to be a very important issue to most neighborhoods where affordable housing is placed, and it basically backs up what the traffic studies and what the developers' own studies indicate, that parking goes largely underutilized. If we were to create the additional, I believe it's something like 14 parking spaces to meet sort of the standard parking requirements in the city of Glendale, that would be just a tremendous amount of labor to create those parking spaces, material, all the concrete, all the steel, all the excavation, all that dirt that has to be placed somewhere. After the project is constructed, those spaces, even though they're not utilized, would have to be maintained, ventilated, and kept clean, etc. And so it's a tremendous ongoing, initial and ongoing waste of resources, and obviously contributes to the detriment of the environment. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. So instead of using the space for additional parking, you're using it for units? Is that kind of what I'm hearing? The amount of money that you would spend for parking, you're actually using
obviously
it?
We're not going to put units in the basement, but that money and those additional spaces, and I am not a cost estimator. Maybe the developer can speak a little bit better towards this, but I would assume anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million worth of resources that could be devoted to affordable housing, would be going unused forever.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I have Chris Taga. And he'll be followed by D. Bruce Prout.
Good morning. I'm the president of the 361 Salem Homeowners Association, and I'm one of the condo owners there. And my concern is with the parking on the street. On the south side of the street, there's no parking allowed at all, except on Fridays when they're cleaning the north side of the street. So, and it's always a fight for parking on our street, if you want to park on the street. It's so bad that we have difficulties putting out our trash bins, on our on the day they're scheduled to pick up recycle and vegetation bins. So that's a concern. Public Works Department, it states that if we leave them on the curb that they'll pick them up, but they don't. We have to leave them on the street. Otherwise, the trucks can't really get to there because the cars are in the way. And the guys aren't going to come out there every time and, do that. Also, I do have concerns with the number of units that is proposed in this project. It seems like the area is fairly dense already, and I'm not opposed to multi-unit, construction, but I think I forgot 58 units are proposed. It seems like quite a lot.
36.
Or 37, yeah.
Yeah, 36 units.
Yeah. For instance, our condos, we only have 7 units there, and the condos across the street, I believe there's about a dozen units there. So, I believe the neighborhood's already impacted with, a large number of residents.
Now, do you have on-site parking for your condo?
Yes. We have subterranean parking.
Do you know how many spaces you have? I mean, do your residents
We
actually
have
use them?
2 for every, so we have 14 spaces plus, actually, we're supposed to have 2 spaces for guest parking, but the way it was constructed is if you have 2 spaces for guest parking, we can't, it makes it difficult for the cars to get in and out. They have to do that seesawing to get out if people park in the guest spaces.
Okay, but you have guest spaces. They're just not used. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's not used because it's in,
Hard to get in and out.
correct.
Okay.
And I guess that's it.
Okay, have you applied for residential parking permits? Do you know if members of your homeowners association have to park on street?
No, I believe because we only have 7 units, then, it's adequate parking for our particular, the unit owners in my condominium.
Okay.
But, there's apartments next door, and there's apartments on California Street, and, the parking is just terrible. And plus, during the holidays, the traffic from the mall, people are parking illegally a lot of times until they get run out of there by the traffic department. Well, especially during the holidays. In fact, they have to block off the streets around our neighborhood during the holidays because of the traffic problem.
Okay.
So it makes it difficult. And that's my concern about this project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have D. Bruce Prout, followed by Richard Espiritu. Hi.
Thank you for hearing me. Yes, I'm the owner of the apartment building on 347 Salem. It's a 7-unit apartment building. And I spent a lot of money fixing this building up and maintaining it. And it's been a good apartment, and we have very little turnover there. But it's a major problem. Parking is just a major problem along that street. As this gentleman said, you can't park on one side of the street, so there's only parking on one side. I go down there maybe once or twice a week just to make sure things are in good shape. And I have to park in the driveway or try to get in the parking area of the building itself. Parking on the street is just virtually not available. And I'm very concerned that a project of this size, you're going to have guest parking. You're going to have people just come up and don't want to park downstairs. You're going to have a lot of parking on the street that we don't have right now. So it's going to be a greater demand for parking on Salem. In addition to the traffic along Salem, Salem is not a wide street. Salem is one of the narrower streets in that area. You go to the blocks to the north and the south, and they're, I think, 60 feet wide. Salem is 50 feet wide, so it is a narrower street. And I understand the problem about trash. I mean, we have a real problem getting a place to put trash out on the street. And the impact of this whole thing on this area down there, I'm just very concerned about. It's a nice residential area. There's more single-family, one-story type buildings down there, I think, than there are 2 and 3. But there's absolutely no 4-story building anywhere in the 500-foot radius or even beyond. It's the maximum height you see are 3 stories, and most of them are 1 and 2. So I think it's going to be a blight on the area having something this big moving in that area. The gentleman said there's 6 stories to the east. Yes, there's 6 stories, but that's 6 stories commercial along Salem, and that's where the higher buildings end. From there going on west, there's no 6 stories, there's no 4 stories, mainly 1, 2, and some 3s. So I'm really opposed to these concessions, and the waiver is going to bring a lot more people into the area, and I think it's going to have a negative impact on what is a nice residential area right now.
Thank you. And Mr. Spiritu, followed by Barry Allen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Richard Espiritu. I'm not against this project. Matter of fact, I'm in favor of any affordable housing project. However, I do have a couple of questions. The public transportation was alluded to. However, according to the Transportation and Parking, they're going to eliminate all B-line buses off of Central Avenue in the near future. There will be no public transportation whatsoever on Central, either the MTA or the B-line. One of the other questions that I wanted to talk about is the parking. I've been very familiar with California affordable housing projects, and I'm very close to another affordable housing project called Ivy Glen. There was an architect by the name of Ephraim Oliveras who asked for a variance way back when regarding the parking. It's a 24-unit, and that has created nothing but a monumental headache for the residents, the guests, and the people who come over to pick the people up. I'm not really in favor of seeing this type of a reduction. I don't know if we really should go to the other area of 81 parking spaces, but there is no, in this project, there is no answer to handicap parking. Now, one of the other things that I would like to address is SB 1025. This is a state law now, and I talked to the architect, and one of the statements in SB 1025, at least one powder room or bathroom must be located in the primary entry level servicing the accessible route. And I also want to know how many accessible units for people with disabilities will be available. This powder room is more reinforced due to the fact that Mr. Khan had said there's going to be a child play area in the common area. recreational area. You really can't have little kids riding up to the fourth floor to go to the bathroom. It's kind of hard for them, okay? So I really want to know about this restroom in the common area because that is a requirement by SB 1025. Very simple. I really am in favor of any type of affordable project. However, I do have questions regarding the ADA compliance, and I thank you very much for my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Barry Allen. And Barry will be followed by Eric Akandian. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I'm Barry Allen with Van Guardians. I certainly applaud any affordable housing project coming to Glendale. I think it's something really, really needed. But it's listening to the traffic issues and the people who live there. And I have an office at 229 North Central. And parking is absolutely atrocious. Now, somehow or other, this parking issue has become into a vacuum. As Dr. Espiritu just pointed out, there's going to be no public transportation on Central. And as I did not hear was the fact that parking lot 1 at the corner of, Central and Wilson is going to be a hotel. That's a public parking lot. So losing 2 parking lots, cutting down the required number of spaces to 58, looking at the parking issues. And by the way, if anyone has paid any attention to oral communications at city council meetings and at the Transportation and Parking Commission, which I don't think weighed in on this, only the department did, the major complaint in older sections of the city is that nobody then was prescient. Nobody had the crystal ball, as we're hearing predicted today. The fact is the issues are coming up very simple. There's no parking in other parts of the city. So soon, Salem Street will become another part of the city. And that will have the same parking issues that the older places do, because it too will be old. And I believe I heard Mr. Khan talk about the policies and the future of the zoning and issues like that. He's absolutely right, except for one thing. He did mention the future. And we've heard people with crystal balls, and they're talking about data that may or may not be anecdotal, may or may not be accurate, and we have seen issues like this before where the accuracy wasn't there. I think that the issue of parking should be totally reconsidered, and that I don't think a variance should be given for parking. Thank you. Barry Allen for Van Guardians.
Thank you. Mr. Eric McCondian? Oops.
Good morning. My name is Eric McCanyon. We have the building at 229 North Central. We've owned the building for many years, and the parking in the area is extremely problematic. Like the gentleman just mentioned, the reason that the parking is underutilized on that parking lot is because of illegal parking on our lot, which runs directly from California through Salem all the way across. We've had issues with that ever since I can remember, and it is an extreme deal. Tenants leave for lunch, come back, no parking. Sign space, they're out. They park in somebody else's spot. Parking enforcement comes in, gives them, ticket after ticket after ticket. It's just, it's a real issue, and I'm amazed that it's even being submitted that to eliminate the public parking. It amazes me. If this project would be allowed, it would just put considerable amount of pressure on our tenants, and if the city wanted to look into it, all they'd have to do is call parking enforcement and see how many times they come out. In addition to all of this project, if it was to move over 2 lots and the public parking would be utilized, I don't think there would be any as much of an issue. The other gentleman said that as far as the parking on the south side of Salem, and that's absolutely true. There is no parking there. We also have a new project going in on the corner of Central and California, which is a pretty big project, and that is going to further compound the parking issues in the adjoining area. It was also mentioned about Galleria parking. We even have people parking in our lot and walking to the Galleria. So anytime you could use free parking, do you think that people are going to use free parking, or do you think they're going to pay? The calculation for the lot on Lot 12 is completely, it's biased. There's no way that it could be calculated when people are parking in our lot instead of the public parking. So, anyways, that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Seda Aganian, followed by Hovek Aganian.
Hi. I would like there's another speaker to give her time to me, if possible, because I need more than 3 minutes.
Okay.
Jasmine Bedoyan.
Okay. So Jasmine, then you did not want to speak?
No, I just wanted.
Okay.
My name is Seda Agayan, and I am a real estate investor and property manager. My office is located at 100 West Broadway, Suite 950 in Glendale. The Agayan Trust has owned the property at 338 West Salem Street since 1999, and for the past 11 years, I have experienced firsthand the difficult parking situation on this street. I read the documents relating to this specific project with great dismay. There are major fallacies in the data and argument the developer uses to justify his need for less parking for the new development. First, let me go through the numbers. A development of this magnitude will normally require 99 parking spaces. Since this is an affordable housing project, the code asks for only 81 parking spaces, an 18% reduction. The developer is seeking for a variance that would further reduce the number to 58 spaces. This is a huge 28% reduction from the already reduced requirement for 81 spots, and an even greater 41% reduction from the normal requirement of 99 spaces. What is unique to this project is that it further burdens the parking situation on the 300 block of Salem Street by eliminating 34 parking spaces in Lot 12. This is all happening on a street which the neighborhood services states in their communication to be a preferential parking district with substandard width and on-street parking limited to just one side of the street. These observations alone should speak volumes, but there is even more to this story. The developer uses two fallacious arguments to justify his right to a reduced number of parking spaces, and I would like to address each of these. The first argument they make is that other affordable housing developments in Glendale do not use their parking spaces to maximal capacity, and that this suggests that future affordable housing developments should have even less parking spaces. They, however, draw this conclusion by conducting a survey on parking space use at only one affordable housing development in Glendale, Metropolitan City Lights, based upon what appears to me to be randomly generated ratio obtained from this one study. The developer states that 67 parking spaces would be better than required 81. Drawing such a conclusion based on one study conducted over 2 years ago in a part of town which already ample street parking is available is misleading. In fact, I doubt that the parking spaces at this development are underutilized. The manager at Metropolitan City Lights told me yesterday that they would have major problems with any less parking. The manager at Metro Loma, a nearby affordable housing development, gave me the same response. More, not less parking is needed at these sites. The developer goes on to defend his need for only 58 parking spaces by using a second faulty argument. He states that this specific development is in an urban part of town, unlike metropolitan city lights. As such, the residents have easy access to ample public transportation and have less need for cars. He used two outdated studies, each over 6 to 7 years old, conducted mostly in true urban centers such as San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York City, with public transportation systems to justify a further 20% reduction in the number of parking spaces. With the 20% reduction, he reaches his goal of 58. Anyone who claims Los Angeles, let alone Glendale, to have an accessible public transportation system similar to major urban centers is being foolish. To get one step further and claim that further inhabitants of this complex will need 1/3 less the number of parking spots compared to their counterparts at other affordable housing locations is completely ludicrous. If such drastic changes are being proposed for an already congested street, then a more thorough, systematic investigation of parking needs in affordable housing developments is needed before a final decision is made. The public should be allowed to weigh in, as the final decision also has an impact on the quality of life and well-being of those who will live beyond the confines of this multifamily development. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. And then we have Hovick. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know to say good morning or good lunch. My name is Hovik Agayan, and I'm architect and developer, real estate investor for 30 years. My office is located 1415 East Colorado Suite 100 in Glendale. This Salem apartment development project is similar to the rape and run anecdote that a former council member referred to multiple times in the past in her description of some property developers in the city of Glendale. In this case, however, there is a major difference. The city itself is joining forces with the developer in the raping the city. It will affect especially those individuals living in or conducting business in the surrounding areas in 300 blocks West Salem. Do not deliver the parking lot number 12 on a silver plate to the developer. I understand the cost-cutting measures in financial incentives are necessary to promote the development of affordable housing in the city of Glendale, but this cannot be done at a significant cost to others. In this case, cost-cutting measures to the developer in the form of less parking space, translating into big costs to the surrounding residents and the business owners. This means lost business to the nearby establishments from difficult and timely parking measures, lower rents for landlords in this street because it will become less desirable location with a difficult street parking, etc. Also, let me remind you that the 300 block of West Salem is currently not fully developed. Of 28 lots in this block, only 8 have been developed into multifamily dwellings. Where do those investors stand when it's their turn to invest in their land with a new development? Will downzoning downzoning and subsequent financial losses to be their future? I have also been informed that 2 new developments in the work that this will create a further parking crunch in the future in this area. One on the corner of Central and California, and the other one on the Central and Wilson. Having said all this, let me remind you that there is no such a thing as a free lunch. The developer is getting free lunch, while the rest of us pick up the tab. There are solutions to this matter, ones which will make everyone happy. I have examined the plans for the new development, and the developer can easily have more efficient use of parking space that will get them to the minimum 81 spaces required by the code. It will require some effort and dollar amount on their part. But since the rest of us are trying to be understanding of their perspective, and of their perspective is to least they can do for their future neighborhood to promote them teamwork. Second, the city may also easily engage in a project to widen the street, cutting the width of the parkway from 5 feet to 3 feet, so that parking is permitted on both sides in order to mitigate the loss of the parking spaces in the Lot 12. We will not be taken advantage of this situation. We want to promote teamwork. We will speak up and demand an arrangement that has everyone's best interests at heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to comment on this project?
Hi, again, Mike Forney, Housing Product Manager. I filled out a form. I apologize. I just wanted to make an announcement that there's a joint public hearing of the City Council and the Housing Authority that's been tentatively scheduled for March 16th, 2010. And the purpose of that meeting is to consider, for the Housing Authority, a letter of loan commitment, and for the City Council, terms of the disposition of the city-owned parking lot.
Okay.
If I could, too, on my earlier comments,
Yes.
I hadn't mentioned, but I'd plan to. The Metro City Lights and Metro Loma, both of those are affordable housing projects that we've sponsored. Staff, CRNH staff, myself and others included, have entered those buildings multiple times over the time that those have been in operation. And we have all witnessed that there are probably twice the number of parking spaces as are needed. There's probably less than half there actually is. So I'll be interesting to see when I speak with the managers of both Metro Loma and Metro City Lights where they had based the idea that those projects might require more parking.
Okay, and all the city projects so far that are affordable, the 4 that were mentioned, they're all larger than this one, is that correct? More units?
Both Metro City Lights and Metro Loma are larger. We have one that's going to be complete this month or next, which is 30 units, and another one that's larger at 68 units, but those 2 aren't occupied yet.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else wish to submit a speaker's card? No. With that, I'd like to call forward the project applicant for rebuttal.
Thank you and good morning again. Some of these items I'm going to address myself, and then a few of the items that were brought up specifically as it relates to accessibility and disability issues, I'd like our architect to address.
Okay.
He's more competent with those items. As it relates to some of the items, I'll try to kind of group them as to what I heard and be able to kind of expand on what the thoughts were or why we did what we did. First of all, I think there's an existing parking problem in the area. I think everybody acknowledges that. We acknowledge it as well. We are not creating that problem. We have not created it. In fact, we're improving that situation. I already talked about in my original presentation about how we're putting more on-street parking existing than currently. So if there is a parking problem, yes, that's an issue. Whether there was a parking problem or not out there, our parking is sufficient for our project. That's not the criteria we're judging it on. In terms of, gentlemen spoke about the traffic department analyzing whether the traffic's going to be increased in the area. The traffic and transportation did look at the traffic as well. It wasn't just the parking. They looked at the traffic as well. They concluded that the number of trips that were being generated from this project, either to or from it, was not significant in terms of impacting that street. So that was certainly addressed and reviewed as well. The one gentleman talked about the number of stories in the area, and that I had mentioned about a 6-story building to the east. The 6-story building exists to the east. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, it's on that street. It's part of that neighborhood. In fact, access to the parking for that building is off of Salem Street. The accessibility issues, as I mentioned, I was not aware, quite frankly, it was brought up that Central Avenue is no longer going to have transit in terms of both the MTA and B-Line. I'd love to hear if that's true. That would be news to me. I didn't know about that. In terms of the gentleman that talked about the parking and that people are encroaching into his private parking lot, I wouldn't doubt that at all. I think that happens throughout the city of Glendale. I think wherever there's easy access to any parking space, whoever owns it, people typically just go there, park, and get out. That's the way it is. What we are doing is saying we will provide easy access parking for our residents and for their guests. The one gentleman talked about his 7-unit, and they have 2 guest parking spaces, but they can't use it. But we have 9 guest parking spaces, and we can use them. The one gentleman who spoke about, I won't even comment on, about what the city is doing, what the developer is doing. Those are very strong words. Interesting. I think that if you look at what is being proposed in terms of public comment, this is the appropriate forum for public comment. So no one is being left out. There was a comment made that all the public should be allowed to weigh in on these affordable housing projects. You are. That's what we're doing here today. That's what we'll do this evening. That's what we'll do at the Design Review Board hearing, and that's what we're going to do at the Housing Authority. So it's a system that's already been set up. It doesn't need to be revised or be tweaked. Once again, a comment was made about people walking or people parking in the area and walking over to the Galleria. Well, that's a existing condition that we have nothing to do. But what that shows me is that the residents of our and tenants of our building will be able to walk to the Galleria. It'll be very close, along with all the other amenities and accessories that I mentioned in my original presentation, both the restaurants, the retail space, etc. Once again, we think this is an excellent location. This is a nice neighborhood. This is a great neighborhood for all the amenities and for where it's at located to the central business district. We think this is a project that's very, very worthwhile. To go back, why are we here to begin with? We're here to provide affordable housing units in the city of Glendale. We have thousands upon thousands of residents that need affordable housing. Okay. This is a small drop in the bucket. How do we create that? We create that through density bonus ordinances, through concessions, and through waivers. Exactly what we're doing here today. Anyway, I'll conclude my remarks. I promised that I'd have the architect address the accessibility issues. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you. You've already spoken.
I have 1 minute left of my time.
No, you've already spoken.
To address a couple of the issues in terms of accessibility, the parking plan, if you look at the second sheet down on the left, the light blue indicates the accessible path that goes from our 4 accessible parking spaces, which are very easily accessible, and they are some of the first spaces to be accessed when you go into the parking garage.
Would you like to come up and point those out? And just watch out for the step there.
1, 2, 3, 4 spaces marked with an H indicate our accessible parking spaces, and this is the path, wider than required, and it goes to the elevator. We purposely put these spaces so that they're easily accessible as soon as you enter the garage from the ramp, and so you don't have to cross over any traffic lanes or behind any other parking spaces in order to access the elevator. That puts you on the first floor, and at the first 2 of our units right off of the elevator are going to be fully accessible units. All the rest of our residential units are fully adaptable. The accessible and adaptable units all comply with the California Building Code, Title 24, and in fact they exceed, and in many cases are more towards the concept of universal access. Let's see if there were any other comments.
There was one about having restroom facilities available in the common area that
Yes.
would be a handicap accessible.
Yes, we have a single-user toilet access in our community room, which is at the very top, adjacent to the stairs, and that's clearly indicated on the plans. Let me point it out. Okay. There's a toilet here. This is a fully accessible toilet so that anyone using the community room doesn't have to run to their unit if they have an emergency.
Do you know if that meets the requirement
Yes,
of the
it
law
does.
that was stated? Okay.
Yes, it does. So nobody's perfect. If we have made an omission or a mistake in our drawings, there will be plenty of time to correct that. Obviously, this has to go through our own internal review. It has to go through the building department. So and of course all the public comment periods. So we're more than willing to comply with all the requirements. And in fact, as it stands, we have exceeded them.
Okay.
And I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Are there any more rebuttal comments from the applicant? No? Hearing none. Well, at this point, staff, do you have any additional comments to add?
Kind of on line with Mr. Fortney talking about the hearing, there's also going to be a design review board hearing, and I don't have the calendar in front of me. It's either March 3rd or March 4th, so like the first week in March.
March 4th.
March 4th would be design review board hearing. And that would be at, I believe that starts at 5 as well, right? 5 p.m.
Yes.
And I do have a sequel question for you. With regards to having a project mitigate existing impacts in an area, what I've heard today is that absolutely there's an existing parking problem without a doubt in the neighborhood. And then I'm also hearing that this project itself, as proposed, is mitigating the impact it is creating. Does CEQA require us to address impacts that are already in the neighborhood through this project?
CEQA, and basically it requires you to address what's called the baseline conditions and how that would change as part of your project. So in terms of CEQA, the baseline starts when a project's been deemed complete. So in this case, whatever problems there are associated with the parking in the area would not have to be addressed by the project itself, since those are kind of what's called the baseline conditions under CEQA. The one thing we did need to look at, and which we did in this environmental document, was the loss of the parking, because that's something, the city parking lot, because that's something that would occur as a result of the project. So that was included in the mitigated neg deck, but the existing parking conditions are not required under CEQA to be addressed as the project having an impact on, well, you would have to address it if you have the parking impact out there. You'd have to address it if you're going to further impact that. But since the project is providing the parking that's necessary for its own demand, then it wouldn't add to the additional existing parking situation.
Okay. Well, in that case, thanks for clarifying that point. At this point, I am going to take this case under submission. I'll be looking at the environmental document as well as the staff report and consider all the comments that I've received today. With that, I will close this, or not, well, I'm taking this item under submission. I'm closing the public hearing, and we will have the next case. And here's your card.
Room 103.
I don't have any.
Appreciate anything you can do.
Okay, let us continue. I'm going to open case number PVAR 2009-011 at 1003 East Palmer Avenue. Applicant is Omnipoint Communications, The owner is Alejandro Valenzuela. Case planner is Milka Toledo. This is an application for a variance from the 25-foot height restriction to allow the construction and installation of a new unmanned wireless telecommunication facility located on an approximately 9,540 square foot vacant lot. The proposed equipment includes a 45-foot high monopole, 6 panel antennas mounted on the pole, 6 radio cabinets mounted on a concrete pad, and a backup battery unit. The equipment will be located in a new, approximately 440 square foot, 8-foot high concrete masonry unit enclosure. Again, located at 1003 East Palmer Avenue in the C1 Neighborhood Commercial Zone, described as a portion of Lot 36 Watt Subdivision. So before I look at the file and see if there's some comments, I'll ask the case planner, Ms. Toledo, to give her staff report.
Yes, thank you, Hearing Officer Kraus. As indicated, the application is for a variance to allow the construction and installation of a new unmanned wireless telecommunication facility. It would be located on a lot that is currently vacant. It is 9,540 square feet. The proposed equipment, again, includes a 45-foot high monopole, 6 panel antennas mounted on the pole, and 6 radio cabinets mounted on a concrete pad, and a backup battery unit, which will all be enclosed within a new 440 square foot, 8-foot high concrete masonry unit enclosure. The variance is required because the pole exceeds the height that is allowed in that neighborhood, in that zone, which is 25 feet, and they're proposing 45-foot height for the monopole. As far as CEQA, the Community Planning Department conducted an initial study and proposed a negative declaration for this project, and that would be found in Environmental Information Form PEIF 2009-010. So again, it is a negative declaration, so there are no mitigation measures for this project. As indicated, the project is located in the C1 commercial zone. The properties abutting the site to the east, for example, and the rear north include a multifamily development, and uses across the street to the south would be both commercial and residential developments. As indicated, the site is currently vacant, and we've discussed what the project applicant is proposing, which again is a 45-foot high monopole, which resembles a cypress tree. The applicant is proposing, again, to exceed the maximum allowable height by 20 feet. The antennas are to be screened with a faux cypress tree foliage. And the reason why they're doing this is because one of the prevailing tree species located on the abutting site to the north are cypress trees. As a matter of fact, if I recall, currently there are 3 cypress trees on the adjacent lot to the north. However, the applicant is proposing to blend their proposed faux cypress tree or monocypress with these trees as it relates to height and type. Now, as you know, the variances can be granted if 4 required findings can be made, and staff in their analysis noted the following as it relates to the findings. The variance is justified on the basis that the strict application of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship, in that a 45-foot high wireless facility is necessary in order to facilitate and effectively propagate transmission signals in this area. Unique conditions to the property benefit the proposal in that there are mature cypress trees, as I noted earlier, abutting on the site to the north. In addition, the subject site is vacant, whereas the surrounding uses are, or in this case, the surrounding area is built, which would limit the possibility of establishing a structure of this type. The proposal will not be detrimental to the public welfare in that the proposal will blend aesthetically with the surrounding property, since, again, the existing cypress tree and the adjacent lot will help blend with the new monocypress as it relates to height and type. And also the proposed 45-foot high will, in this case, the height will provide cell phone carrier users with better coverage in the area. Finally, granting of the variance will be in keeping with the objectives of the ordinance in that the proposal will provide service to the community, which is in keeping with the land use element and, in this case, a land use element of the general plan. So staff believes that the findings can be made in a positive manner and therefore recommends approval with the following conditions as well, which would be to remove all vehicles stored on the subject site, and that the project shall obtain design review approval or exemption prior to obtaining a building permit. I would also like to note, I know that you're going to address this when you come across the letters, many letters that have been submitted for this project. Once this project was advertised and notified, the case received many letters in opposition for this particular case. Main concerns, again, are aesthetics, the fact that also there is recent historic designation within close proximity to the site, referred to as Cottage Grove. And again, some of the letters indicate that the height is not necessary, and I believe there was one indication that I believe it was the Adams Hill Association provided a map coverage showing transmission signals. And again, I know that you're going to address this in your review. However, I just wanted to, for the record, to show that we have received the many letters in opposition for this case. And that concludes my presentation at this time.
Thank you. I did have a couple of questions. In your staff report, you mentioned there weren't really any significant comments from other departments. Okay, so I won't make reference to those. I'll just look at the correspondence from the public then. Do you know if the vehicles have been removed yet?
I have not visited this site within the last couple of weeks. The last time that I was there, approximately a month ago, the vehicles were still there.
Still there, okay.
But that has been an ongoing concern for staff, and the applicant is aware of it, and there has been correspondence specifically alluding to that matter.
Okay. Thank you. All right, then, let me make some reference to some of the communications we've received from the public. Let's see if I can hit some of the highlights here. Some of them are emails. I don't know if all of them are emails. This is from Christopher Welch, president of the Adams Hill Neighborhood Association. And let's see if I can summarize. All right. They are in opposition as they can't agree that the findings can be met. And apparently their claim is that there's excellent service for T-Mobile, both for regular cell service and higher level 3G service. And Mr. Welch apparently is a T-Mobile customer using a 3G phone. Both in the flats and the hills found no inability to make calls or get service. 5 out of 5 bars, and then included some maps. Again, claiming objection because it will be a dominant feature in the area. Yep. And again, concerned about additional applicants coming forward. Okay. And then here's an email from, let's see, Javier E. Garcia, in opposition. Unsightly, not just from the nearby neighbors, but also for the many residents living in the nearby hillside. Mentioned the Cottage Grove historical area, doesn't fit in.